Greetings and welcome to Mount Vernon Unitarian Church. I'm the Reverend Christian Schmidt, the interim minister of this congregation. Now, whether this is your first time with us or your 1001st, know that you are welcome here, and we are so glad to have you. We're happy to provide this forum, currently virtual only, to find comfort and recommit ourselves to the mission of supporting one another in our spiritual journeys, of working for justice, caring for the earth, and building the common good. We gather to recommit ourselves to dismantling systems of oppression and injustice. It is good to be together. I have an announcement for you. It's something I'm very excited about. We're doing a project with an organization called UU Wellspring, which is committed to spiritual deepening for Unitarian Universalists. We're doing a 6-session curriculum they do called Wellspring Reads Sacred Earth. It's the first such program they've done of this. They've done traditionally longer-term programs. This provides a foundational experience dear to UU's hearts. Sacred Earth in particular combines wisdom of indigenous understandings of reciprocity with the sacred earth and with spiritual practices that connect our spirit to nature. To register for this, it'll be on Monday evenings every 2 weeks for most of the spring. You can look for your emails or go to our website at mvuc.org. Lastly, to mention the website again, look to the website or to your email or to all our other means of communication for continued updates about worship. We hope to return to in-person worship again soon in the next 6 or so weeks. And other church happenings as we continue to monitor this pandemic and decide what's the safest thing for us to do. And know if you are ever in need, please just let us know. Now I encourage you to take a moment, a couple of deep breaths perhaps, as we enter into this time of worship.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. I'm Catherine Tobin, a member of the church and currently serving on our board of trustees. I'm here today to talk briefly about the transition time our community is in. This interim time between when Reverend Kate, our settled minister, said goodbye last summer, and when, a little over a year from now, we will welcome our new minister. At the same time our church is in a transition, all of us have been living in a global pandemic. We've had to transition here too, again and again, trying to do our best to stay healthy and flourish. It's been an unsettling time on so many levels, but it has also been a time for reflection, a time to dig deeper and think about our own spiritual lives and about the community of our church. How many times have you heard the words, "I miss seeing you. I miss having a cup of coffee and catching up with friends and meeting new people in the commons after services." Soon, I hope within weeks, we can return to the grounds and chapel of our church. It will be a homecoming to the church grounds and a reunion with friends. As many of you return to the grounds this spring, I'd like you to think about your personal relationship with the church. And for those of you who largely participate online, think and tell us about your experience and consider how you can engage even more in the church community with the various online get-togethers we host. Think about your personal relationship to the church. What does this church and this community give to you? How are you invested in the church? What more do you seek from the church, and what more can you give? Stay in touch and get engaged. Each of us in this community can help steward or tend the church, shaping her, strengthening her, readying her for our next chapter together. Let me give you 3 examples of stewardship and taking care of our community, ones from our current interim period. One person recognized the need for the church chapel to be painted, and she wanted to do what she could to make that happen. So thanks to her, on your return, you will see a refreshed and renewed chapel. It's wonderful. Another person made a significant financial gift to kickstart taking care of a formerly crumbling and potholed parking lot. It's now brand new and fresh. Then last summer, a small group of people saw a problem in the garden areas. It was at a time when we were able to return very briefly to see the church and each other in person. There, on our grounds, were dead and dying boxwood bushes in the walled garden area where special events are held. The bushes were affected by a fungal blight that's hit non-native English boxwoods across the mid-Atlantic. A task force was created. To date, 18 households have made contributions. These people saw a need and took action. The dead plants were recently removed, and the ground is ready now for spring with new soil, mulch, and nearby seeded grass. Soon, new native trees and shrubs will be placed in the walled garden. When you come back, please take a look and see what's been accomplished by our community. I think you'll be delighted, if not dazzled. So I'm asking you, each of you, now and into the spring, to think, how do you benefit and how can you give additional financial support to the church? Those of you who only participate online, there's a role for you too. We need better, new technology to handle the complexities of live streaming. This brings me to my second point, which is the perspective of the Board of Trustees, of which I'm a member. In our role, we are charged to make decisions to support the congregation's mission. That includes determining how to finance our organization. How do we finance its ministry and worship programs? Its religious education offerings for children, families, and individuals of all ages. How do we remunerate our church staff, all of whom have to juggle so many different balls to make our broad program of offerings work? And finally, how do we finance the overall maintenance of this village on a hill? Right now, we're working in close collaboration with the Finance Committee to build the budget for the next year, our second year of interim ministry. In May, at the church's annual meeting, to which you'll all be invited, we will report to you on what's to come, including, I believe, the budget. But here's a preview. We will have increased costs that must be financed. First, there are significant cost of living increases we hope to be able to factor in terms of staff salaries. We have a search committee soon to be formed that will bring in settled minister candidates, all in support of choosing and welcoming our next settled minister. Obviously, there will be costs for travel there. We have heating and cooling systems that are many years beyond their shelf life, and we need to figure out how to pay again for a regular cleaning service at the church once we're all back in person. Finally, there's the technology we need to provide for our multi-platform Sunday services. Thus, in this interim period, we're trying to get our church on a solid footing for going forward. As the church leadership calculates next year's interim period budget, it is clear we need more than the current year's funding. We have a balanced budget currently, and we seek next year's budget to be so too. We can do that if we achieve a 10% overall increase in pledge revenue to take care of these needs. Thus, our 2022 stewardship season begins, and we wish to share with you that we seek your help. We ask that each of you think carefully about your annual gift to the church. This is your church, and we are grateful to all of you who contributed this year. And we ask and hope each of you will do everything you can to help the church community and its grounds flourish. Thanks so much for your attention this morning. I look forward to seeing you online and in person at our home, Mount Vernon Unitarian Church. We have a precious spiritual community, and all of us can contribute to keep this beloved church healthy and strong.
Our chalice lighting and opening words today are by Katie Gelfarb, entitled The Abundance of Our Lives Together. We light our chalice as a symbol of gratitude as we celebrate the abundance of our lives together. In this sanctuary, we harvest bushels of strength for one another and offer our crop with the hands of compassion and generosity. In the authentic and gentle manner of our connections, we cultivate a simple sweetness to brighten our spirits. May we be grateful for the ways we nourish and uplift each other, for it is the sharing of this hallowed time together that sustains us.
Good morning. Would you please turn in your gray hymnals to number 205, Amazing Grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we'd first begun.
I invite you to join us as we unite our voices to speak aloud the covenant of our community. The words are both displayed upon your screen and known within our hearts. Love is the teaching of this church, the quest of truth is its daily task, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve life in community, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony. This is our covenant with each and with all.
We are glad we have this food to make our bodies strong, our minds quick, and our actions kind and good. That's what my family said every night when I was growing up before we had dinner. Usually when you say something like that before you eat, it's called saying grace. But what does that, saying grace, have to do with the grace we're talking about in our service this morning? The kind of grace we're talking about in our service has to do with thinking about things that come to you even though you don't deserve them. You get them just because you're you, and they're things to be thankful for. Sometimes when you're saying grace, you're taking a moment to think about the things that you've been blessed with, that came to you not because you deserve them, but just from luck. I have a story about that this morning. Take a look at this.
Once there was a great chef who was famous throughout the land. She was so good, she taught other people how to cook, and their food was almost as tasty as hers. Just for fun, she would throw fancy dinner parties once a month. Everyone wanted to be invited to these dinners. For these dinners, she would instruct the student chefs to cook new and extravagant dishes. The dinner guests, in awe of the chef's skill, would spend dinner savoring each bite. All you would hear would be little and ohs. Because she always wanted to feature new goodies to eat at all her parties, she would travel far and wide all over the land to experience new food. Everywhere she went, the town would honor her. The best cooks would create dishes unique to their region. The great chef tasted them all and requested the recipes of the dishes she liked best. As you can imagine, she ate a lot of food and knew a great deal about how to prepare the best meals. One evening, while traveling home, the chef stopped at a small country house to ask for directions to a hotel. The family insisted she spend the night with them. Happily, she was in time for dinner. The mother took a casserole out of the oven. Brother tossed a salad with different vegetables. Sister sliced the bread. Let me help, said the chef, so she set the table for the four of them. When everyone was seated at the table, the family held hands. The chef felt the young sister's hand slip into hers, and the chef, in turn, reached out for the brother's hand. The mother said to have food upon the table, and the children replied, is a blessing. And the mother said, the sunset and the possibility of another sunrise tomorrow is a blessing, the children replied. The love of family, the warmth of friendship, and the grace of the Spirit is a blessing, said the children, and the chef replied together. Then they laughed, happy that the chef had joined in their grace. They ate, and during the meal, everyone told stories about their day. The chef could not believe how delicious the food was. She didn't want dinner to end. All things must end, however, and off to bed the children went. May I have the recipes? The chef asked the mother, who was flattered that the chef had so enjoyed their simple meal. In the morning, the chef rode on towards home. When she got home, she went straight to the kitchen, gave the young chefs the recipes, and told them to start preparation for a dinner party tomorrow night. Tomorrow came, and the guests arrived, and the casserole, salad, and bread were served. The chef took a bite and chewed. Something was wrong. Something was missing. This was not like the meal she'd had at the farmhouse. She ordered the students to explain what they had done differently, but they promised they had only followed the recipes. So she sent someone to go to the farmhouse to bring the mother to her house. The mother came, and the chef asked her what was missing ingredient that she had left out of the recipe. "What's missing cannot fit into a recipe," she replied. "Did you and your guests make the meal together? Did you hold fast to each other while giving thanks? Did you share your stories during the meal?" "No," the chef replied. None of that had happened. When the chef realized that sharing a meal together, what we call breaking bread together, was about more than just eating good food. It was about working together, sharing lives, and sharing laughs. It was about being thankful for the food, not because it was fancy or the best, but because being together to enjoy the food would nourish you, your family, and your friends. After that, the chef decided to throw small, intimate dinner parties. She and her guests would work together with the student chefs, and they would all sit together, give thanks, and enjoy the very best of meals.
Mount Vernon Unitarian Church continues to share the plate with committed organizations that you, our members, have chosen. During the month of February, our offering is being shared with Friends of Guest House. This nonprofit organization helps female ex-offenders in Northern Virginia make the difficult transition from incarceration back into the community. Most of the women residents have been released from Northern Virginia jails where they served time for nonviolent offenses. They're determined to make a new life for themselves and often their children, despite the tough obstacles they face in gaining job skills, obtaining job interviews, getting hired, being accepted as tenants, and overcoming trauma. Guest House, based in Alexandria, has had a remarkable success rate, with only 10% of its graduates reoffending within a year, compared with 70% of ex-inmates reoffending nationally. We're a community that invites spiritual and material generosity from our members and friends. I give because this church community sustains my search for spirituality and supports our community and the well-being of our community at large. I invite all gathered to offer that which you are most comfortable in spiritual and financial generosity. If you would like to mail a check, please make it payable to MVUC, and in the memo line, indicate how you wish it to be used. You can also connect to the link in the chat box to make a one-time or recurring donation. We are grateful for your donations.
Each week in our worship, we take a time for silent reflection followed by spoken meditation. I invite you to get ready for this time now by getting comfortable wherever you are, getting those last wiggles out, getting everything comfortable. Take a deep breath in and out. We'll begin with some time of silent reflection. Our spoken meditation today comes from Ma Teresa Tet Gustillo Gallardo. It's called Ultimate Grace. Ultimate grace, the heart of every matter, in every perfection and imperfection, in all senses and tenses, in moments of every right and wrong, presenting choices to inquiring hearts. You are in the purpose and the journey of mishaps. You are in moments of understanding and misunderstanding. We have but to seek and invoke you and enable the work of your Spirit. As prayer is but an articulated common dream, we invoke our ultimate concern for the work of faith. We long to be hand in hand, creating a world where everyone belongs. Free us from our hindrances, make invisible things visible, the voiceless heard. Lay what is hidden before us. Make the chained unbound, the doubting believe. What is confusing, let clarify, as hardened hearts grow soft to the touch. May we come in fullness with gratefulness and faithfulness to one another. May we speak in kind conversing, disclosing what are truths with care, expressing our practical wisdom to learn of its practical limits. For the world was not meant to be possessed by a singular truth, but to be built together upon revelations. O universe with stars in your hair, you have shown that great things emerge from humble beginnings, no matter how flawed and lacking. That one story in a stable, in prison, in the cave, in destitution, in abject poverty, if lived in all sincerity, can liberate from darkness the many. May our eyes seek to appreciate, our breaths to dedicate power, our hands to warm each other. When loving fearlessly, we are invincible. When free will is deliberate, we are pivotal. When dreaming together, we are infinite. Remind us of the very questions that we have turned away from, that we thought could not be answered or impossible to realize. Dear universal intelligence, your embrace contains everything, but confines nothing. In the ever-insistence of existence, may this one moment count. Amen.
Good morning. Would you turn in your teal hymnals, please, to number 1053? How could anyone? Words are also displayed on your screen or in your orders of service. How could anyone ever tell you were anything less than beautiful? How could anyone ever tell you you were less than whole? How could anyone fail to notice that your loving is a miracle? How deeply you're connected to my soul. How could anyone ever tell you you were anything less than beautiful? How could anyone ever tell you you were less than whole? How could anyone fail to notice that your loving is a miracle? How deeply you're connected to my soul.
Our reading today comes from the Reverend Elia Kemmler. It's called The Church Where Everything Goes Wrong. 6 weeks into the church year, I've realized I am the minister of a church where things usually go wrong. This morning, the copy machine jams repeatedly. The bulletin describing the order of worship has been copied with the second page first and also upside down. No one has remembered to turn on the lights in the sanctuary before the service, so it is dark because it is raining outside. The microphone is buzzing and lets out a painful, high-pitched squeal, which makes people wince. We have just started the service when someone runs up with a bunch of flowers for the altar, just as someone else runs in with one of the silk arrangements we keep for the morning when no one brings real flowers. There is laughter as the two flower bearers meet at the altar. They decide on the real flowers, and things settle down for a while until a baby starts crying, which sets off another baby crying. I try to speak over the wailing as their fathers hustle them down the aisle and try to distract them in the back. Usually I love watching the tall, gentle fathers who bounce their babies in backpacks at the rear of the sanctuary. But today I'm annoyed because I want it to be quiet and holy and lovely, and things are definitely not shaping up that way. The woman who is helping with worship gets up and, instead of giving the announcements, introduces the candle lighting time, which is supposed to come later. People call out, "Not yet!" More laughter. The organist starts playing the wrong hymn, and a couple of choir members yell over the din for him to stop. A few minutes later, during the period for prayerful silence, he accidentally falls onto the keyboard, causing the organ to emit horrible, gassy noises. Shrieks, snorts of laughter. All pretense of Sunday morning decorum is lost, and something inside me, some furious, bossy desire to have my worship service go according to my plan, finally slides free and I can laugh with them. This will be the first of many times that I laugh at Sunday morning details gone awry. It's also the first of many times that I imagine that God is watching, looking up or down or over or out at us from wherever God sits on Sunday mornings, slightly amazed and maybe at a loss for words because we, God's people, are so funny and wonderful and odd all at the same time. In moments like these, I imagine God as a sturdy old woman with her hands on her hips, or perhaps as a rabbi pulling on his long white beard. I imagine a God shaking his or her head and saying, "What in the world are they doing over there? This is what they call church? What were they thinking?" But I also imagine a God who is touched, and maybe a little honored by our efforts, however halting, to worship and give praise. I imagine a God who is moved by our attempts to care for one another and to name the things we know as holy. There is a warmth in this congregation that is new to me, a simple friendliness that shines through the fumblings and failures, a love that makes the ragged edges smooth. I've always wanted to believe, really believe, that our mistakes aren't the most important parts of us. I have always wanted to believe that kindness and compassion matter more than anything. I sense that I can learn this here. And so ends our reading. Before I get into today's sermon, I need to say a few things. This week, my home state of Texas has implemented horrific, radical anti-trans policies that will hurt trans children and their families. I need to say that this is wrong. It's a cynical ploy, and it's evil, frankly. In the same week, Russia has invaded Ukraine, sparking what could easily be large-scale war across Europe and Asia, the consequences of which we may not know for some time. I mourn for all of the people who will die and be hurt in this conflict, for the people of Ukraine, for everyone involved. We have to find a way to do better as a people, as a world. Today, though, I want to talk about grace. And in some ways, it's just as important as ever with those things going on in our world. I wanted to start by singing, though. Singing perhaps the most famous hymn in the Christian religion, Amazing Grace. But the thing I love about it is that Amazing Grace is a beautiful words. The setting is lovely too, but it can also be set to other songs. I didn't know if you knew that, including one you might recognize, The House of the Rising Sun. I've always loved setting that hymn to this tune. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. I just always love that. If you YouTube, there's some lovely settings of that, actually. Now, the hymn, that is the words, because a hymn is the words, the hymn tune is the music. The hymn Amazing Grace, again, perhaps the best-known Christian hymn ever, was written by John Newton, an Anglican clergyman, sometime in the 1770s. It was first published a few years later. Now, there's an interesting tidbit about that. So Newton, as I said, by that time in his life was a clergyman, had a congregant by the name of William Cowper, who was a poet of some renown. And the two at the time lived in Olney, Buckinghamshire in England. And some of the people who founded the place I now live, Olney, Maryland, were big fans of Cowper's work and named their town after his town in England. Early residents of Olney, Maryland, Sarah Brooke and Dr. Charles Farquhar, were devotees of his work. Now, in any case, Newton and Cowper were friends. They wrote some hymns together, though Newton wrote Amazing Grace himself. And they published a number of these as Olney hymns in the year 1779. I want you to remember that year. It'll become important later in the sermon, 1779. Because the thing you need to know about John Newton is that he was not always a clergyman. Far from it, indeed. He had spent a chunk of his adult life, especially as a young adult, at sea. He was forcibly conscripted as a sailor into the Royal Navy, but then worked on merchant ships, including slave ships. He himself was briefly held, actually, as a slave to Princess Peye, a woman of the Sherbro people, in what we now know as Sierra Leone in Africa. He was later rescued, and shortly afterwards, on returning back towards Britain, he experienced what he later referred to as a spiritual conversion. He had not been a particularly religious person before that. His ship nearly wrecked off the coast of Ireland and took on so much water that it took them nearly 4 weeks to travel the short distance to Donegal, to a port. The near-death experience led him to choose to avoid profanity and gambling and drinking in his life, things he had previously enjoyed. But, and this has to be the largest but in the history of such things, he continued to work in the slave trade even after this conversion. In fact, he became captain of ships that were transporting enslaved peoples from Africa to the West Indies. Now, the story doesn't end there, or we would probably not be talking about John Newton, certainly not about Amazing Grace. After a decade or so as a first mate and a captain and then an investor in these slave ships, he became an Anglican priest, and he began writing sermons and hymns. And so sometime in the 1770s, he wrote Amazing Grace, having slowly and painfully come to terms with his role in the slave trade over the course of a couple decades. A decade later, in 1788, he wrote a powerful pamphlet espousing abolition and describing the horrific conditions on the slave ships he had once worked on. He said it was a, and I quote, confession which comes too late. It will always be a subject of humiliating reflection to me that I was once an active instrument in a business at which my heart now shudders. So why do I tell you this? Because today I'm talking about grace. And by grace, I don't mean the short prayer of thanks you say before meals or the way you walk with fluid motion, though that's good too. Nor your friend named Grace, though I'm sure she's cool too. No, the theological concept of grace, which is something we might describe as unearned blessing. That is, that you, in a moment of need or doubt, struggle or pain, might find a hand to hold, a gift to lift you up. This is grace. Now, one of the best explanations of grace I ever heard was from the Reverend Dr. Robert Allen Hill. He's a Methodist minister and dean of Marsh Chapel at Boston University. I often used to catch his sermon on the campus radio station there when I was driving back from guest preaching during seminary somewhere in the Boston area. And one particular Sunday, after a week in which Boston had experienced significant snowfall and the disruptions that often come with that, he made the most beautiful metaphor. He said that grace, that unearned blessing, can sometimes come in the form of a snowfall that forces the schools to close, making for a snow day. The grace of snow days. A decade later, I still often think about that. As many of you know, I grew up in Texas, where a snow day was a rare thing indeed. I remember only 2 snowfalls my entire childhood, and even they were more of the dusting variety. But we did get a snow day once. Maybe I should actually call it an ice day. It was rainy and then sleety, and, well, the temperature plummeted, and it left a sheen of black ice on many roads and caused a few pipe bursts and the stuff that goes with that and made, well, getting around anywhere a pretty difficult proposition. I remember the day vividly. Not only did we not have to go to school for a day, but we took pieces of cardboard and slid down the street on the ice. We made hot chocolate. It was the kind of day a kid dreams about. Now, grace sometimes comes in bigger moments than that, but as a child, that felt pretty big. So back to John Newton. He said that it was grace that came to him in that moment when he almost died. Now, grace may have taken 30 years to do its work, but it worked. He was lifted from the wretchedness of being a slaver to someone who devoted himself to ending slavery in England and its colonies, something that he lived to see. In 1807, just months before his death, England banned slavery. He was speaking from experience when he said that God's grace had saved him, saved a wretch like me. He had been metaphorically blind to the consequences of his actions, and they were opened. He had been swimming in sin and unaware of it. And this is what grace does. Grace rejects a world in which we are punished or rewarded purely for what we do. We know that's not the case, right? There are people out there, you can insert their names in your head. There are people that are getting rewarded right now despite doing terrible things. And you know some really good people who never seem to catch a break. Now, this isn't a rationalization I'm making for not doing the right thing, just the opposite, actually. I'm saying that doing the right thing doesn't necessarily lead to some instant gratification kind of reward, nor do I particularly believe that there's a reward waiting for us after this life. Grace actually pokes a hole in this way of thinking. It says sometimes you get a break when you don't deserve one. John Newton was profiting from slavery, but grace came and changed him. Grace says that simply because you are human, you are worthy and you can get something nice. John Newton realized his mistake and he worked to rectify it, worked to end slavery. All of us should have the chance to fix our mistakes. Now, there's also a shadow side, the funhouse mirror version, perhaps, of grace, and that is privilege. Unearned favor due to one's identity. Now, you probably know about privilege, but let me just say a little, is privilege favors those with certain identities. Ones you know about, probably. You know, if you're white or straight or male or educated or rich or cisgendered or a number of other things, you get privilege. You get to not be held back by your identity, but instead move forward by it. Privilege, like grace, is unearned, but it is insidious. And privilege always, always, always favors the powerful. The difference between grace and privilege is simple but profound. Grace lifts you up, but not to be above anyone else. Privilege always means that someone else must lose. Privilege ultimately separates us from one another, but grace brings us together. Grace helps us to see the humanity in the failings of others and in our own failings too. There was a movement, and still is a movement, among Latin American theologians some decades ago, started by Gustavo Gutierrez. He posited that God has what he called a preferential option for the poor, that history has shown us that human systems often marginalize certain groups, but God lifts up those who have been marginalized. Now, I don't think you need to believe in God, certainly not in Gustavo Gutierrez's God, to be an agent of good in the world, to be one who lifts up those who society has pushed to the side. And grace can help us to see that. For John Newton, grace showed him that his power, his privilege, we might say, was ultimately hollow and soul-killing. Grace led him to renounce the slave trade and to work for its end. And if ever a soul has been saved from the depths of wretchedness, surely it must be his. But all of us at times could use a moment of grace. And so I hope you find one this week, an unearned blessing. Perhaps grace will come in the form of a flower bud beginning to break through, or a sunny day here in late February to enjoy. Perhaps grace will show up in a generosity of spirit, even though you were late on that assignment in school or at work. And each of us, too, can be an agent of grace, providing perhaps an overly generous tip to a server, or giving the gift of a smile to a passerby. Maybe letting that car go in front of us in the parking lot. The truth is that these continue to be challenging times for so many of us here and all around the world. I believe that small things can add up to big things, and that all of them can make a difference. May each of us go out and make a difference this week. May it be so.
(131) Love will guide us.
Please join together as we extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we gather together again.
Today's benediction comes from Sarah York. She writes, "We receive fragments of holiness, glimpses of eternity, brief moments of insight. Let us gather them up for the precious gifts they are, and renewed by their grace, move boldly into the unknown." Our worship is ended, and our service begins.